The last second arrives without warning. A glass slips from someone's hand and hangs in the air, tilted toward the floor, but never reaching it. Rain freezes outside the window, each drop suspended like a bead of stone. A car's headlights stretch across a wet street, but the car no longer moves. In an apartment above the city, a phone screen glows with a message that will never finish sending. Somewhere, a mouth is open in the middle of a word. Somewhere else, a heart is between two beats. At first, it seems peaceful. The world has become a photograph you can walk inside, but the silence is too complete. There is no traffic, no wind, no distant hum of electricity, no movement of air through a room. Even stillness in the normal world has texture. This is something else. This is not quiet. This is the absence of change. If time truly stopped everywhere, nothing could notice it. No brain could form a thought. No eye could receive new light. No sound could travel. No lungs could pull in air, because breathing is motion, and motion needs time. The idea of walking through a frozen city only works if something is different about you, or if a small bubble around you continues to move while the rest of the universe remains locked in place. That is the strange doorway we are about to enter. Not a superhero fantasy, but a careful thought experiment built from real physics, biology, and the fragile way human life depends on constant motion. We will ask what would happen to the body, to cities, to families, to hospitals, to aircraft, to electricity, to memory, and to fear itself, if the flow of time suddenly broke. This question matters because time is not just what clocks measure. It is the hidden condition behind every ordinary moment. A cup of water pouring, a voice crossing a room, a child blinking, a hand reaching for another hand. All of it depends on one event following another. Remove that sequence, and the familiar world becomes alien at once. So tonight, we will move slowly through that frozen world. We will begin with the first impossible minute, then step deeper into the practical problems of survival, and finally, imagine what might happen if time began again. Along the way, the most frightening discoveries may be the quietest ones. If you enjoy calm documentaries like this, you can like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from tonight. It is always strange and comforting to imagine all these distant rooms, all these separate nights, connected for a while by the same story. Now let the lights grow dim, or turn them off completely. Take one slow breath. Let the noise of the modern world loosen its grip. Outside, the clocks continue for now, but here, for a little while, we are going to enter the second that never ended. The frozen second does not announce itself with thunder. It arrives so perfectly that the first sign is not movement, but the failure of movement to continue. The room keeps its shape. The lamp still spills a soft circle of light across the wall. The clock still shows the same arrangement of numbers, yet something has been removed from everything, as if the world has forgotten the next step in its own sentence. You notice the silence before you understand it, not the comfortable silence of night, when pipes settle in the walls and distant tires whisper on wet pavement, but a silence with no depth at all. It has no layers. No wind presses against the windows. No insect moves in the corner. No electrical hum gathers around the edges of the room. Even your own breathing sounds strangely close, almost private, as if it belongs only to the small space immediately surrounding you. Outside the window, the city is still there. That is what makes it so disturbing. Nothing has vanished. The buildings have not fallen. The streetlights have not gone dark. The world has not ended in fire or in shock. It is simply paused, and the pause is more unnatural than destruction. A catastrophe has movement. Smoke rises, water floods, people run. This has none of that. This has the shape of life without the permission to continue. A line of rain hangs above the street, each droplet holding its own tiny reflection. Normally, rain is a blur, a soft vertical motion too fast for the eye to separate. Now, every drop is a separate object, caught in a different part of its fall. Some are round and perfect. Some are stretched from the moment they were torn away from the cloud. One rests just above the metal railing outside, close enough to seem ready to strike it, yet it never arrives. On the road below, a taxi has stopped in the center of the lane, not parked, not abandoned, but arrested mid-motion. Its tires hold a thin spray of water behind them, suspended like glass threads. The driver's face is turned slightly toward the side mirror. His hand rests on the wheel. In the back seat, a passenger leans toward a phone, one finger floating a few millimeters above the screen. They are not waiting. Waiting belongs to time. They are simply caught. Across the street, a woman is leaving a small grocery store. One foot is on the pavement, the other still lifted behind her. A paper bag tilts in her arm. An orange has escaped and floats beside her knee, trapped in the first instant of its fall. A child near the crossing has one hand raised toward a parent who has not yet turned around. A cyclist hangs in a strange angle above the curb, the front wheel slightly twisted, the moment before balance is lost, preserved without mercy. The first temptation is to call out. Human beings are made to test a strange room with their voice. We ask the world if it is still there by making sound and waiting for an answer. But when you speak, the result feels wrong. Inside the narrow pocket where your body remains alive, your voice is small and immediate. It does not carry properly into the frozen street. It does not return from the buildings. The room gives almost nothing back. Sound is not a thing that exists by itself. It is a disturbance passed through matter, usually through air, molecule nudging molecule in a chain of pressure and release. When someone speaks, their vocal cords vibrate, and those vibrations travel outward. The air must move for sound to cross a room. If time has stopped beyond your small living boundary, then the air outside that boundary cannot take up the vibration. Your voice meets the edge of stillness and dies there. This may be the first true lesson of the stopped world. It is not enough for things to exist. They must be able to change. Air is invisible because it is always yielding. It moves out of the way of your hand. It enters the lungs. It carries warmth, scent, sound, and weather. But air without motion is not the air you know. It becomes an unresponsive substance, present in every space, and yet unable to behave like a fluid. The city below, with all its windows and signs and bodies, is therefore not a silent audience. It is a locked system. Every street is filled with material that cannot rearrange itself unless it is brought into whatever exception allows you to move. Every doorway is packed with stopped air. Every corridor is occupied by the same invisible resistance. The idea of stepping out into it feels suddenly less like freedom and more like pressing your body against the surface of a world made solid. Even vision begins to feel uncertain. At first, you see the street clearly, because the light already within your moving bubble continues to reach your eyes. But ordinary sight depends on a continuous flow of photons, tiny packets of electromagnetic energy traveling from lamps, screens, stars, and reflected surfaces. In the normal world, light crosses a room so quickly that it seems instantaneous. But it still crosses. It still needs time to bring information from there to here. If time stopped absolutely, sight itself would end. No new light would arrive. No image could update. The universe would not be a frozen photograph. It would be inaccessible, because a photograph still requires light to reach the observer. To imagine a visible, frozen world, we must imagine something more subtle. Not a total end of time everywhere, but a boundary, a bubble, a local exception in which your body, the air around you, and perhaps nearby light continue to behave normally. This is not a scientific prediction in the ordinary sense. No known mechanism can suspend the universe while allowing one person to keep moving through it. It is a thought experiment, but a useful one, because it reveals how much of ordinary life depends on processes we never notice. Time is not only a dimension in equations or a number on a clock. It is the condition that allows cause to follow cause. Without it, every simple act becomes a question. You turn from the window and look at the room again. The objects closest to you feel ordinary. The blanket, the floor, the glass of water on the table. Perhaps they belong to the same moving pocket as your body. Perhaps your presence carries a thin zone of active time around you, just wide enough to let your skin feel texture, your lungs draw breath, your thoughts continue, one after another. But beyond that, the world waits without waiting. The edge of the bubble cannot be seen directly. There is no glowing wall, no visible barrier. Its presence is discovered only by consequences. Your voice fades strangely. The air near the window resists. A drifting speck of dust close to your face continues to fall, but another, farther away, hangs motionless in a blade of lamplight. The boundary is not a place so much as a difference between what may change and what may not. You take a slow step toward the door. The floor accepts your weight. Muscles tighten. Bones shift. Blood moves through vessels. Nerves carry signals. Your body is a storm of organized motion, and every part of it is making use of time with astonishing precision. The heart does not simply exist. It contracts, relaxes, fills, and contracts again. The brain does not simply contain thoughts. It produces patterns that unfold in sequence. To be alive is to be in motion at many scales. This is why the fantasy of stopped time is so delicate. If everything in your body stopped with the rest of the universe, you would never know it. There would be no fear, no wonder, no darkness, no awareness of a pause. From your perspective, if time stopped and later resumed, the interval would be missing entirely. It would be less like sleep and more like a film with a frame removed. You would pass from one instant to the next with no gap inside experience. So, for fear to exist, for curiosity to exist, for this strange journey to exist at all, something must remain active. And that exception is not a gift without cost. It separates you from the world more completely than any wall could. A locked door can be opened. A distant voice can be reached by phone. A sleeping person can wake. But a person outside your time is beyond response. They are not ignoring you. They are not asleep.
They are unavailable to cause and effect. At the door, your hand closes around the handle. The metal is cool. It turns, but not easily. The lock belongs to your bubble for a moment, perhaps because you touch it, perhaps because the moving zone includes the objects in contact with you. The door opens a little, and then stops with a pressure that feels enormous. It is not wood blocking the way. It is the air beyond it, packed in place, unable to flow aside. In normal life, when a door opens, it pushes air out of its path. The pressure changes almost too gently to notice. The room breathes. Air slips through the widening gap. But if the air outside the moving region cannot move, then the door meets a medium that cannot make room. The effect would be like trying to open a door into a perfectly rigid, invisible substance. Even a small movement becomes a struggle against the stillness of countless molecules. You do not force it. In a stopped world, strength is not the same thing as control. The familiar rules may still apply locally, but only within the narrow zone that time permits. Outside it, every object is a sealed answer. A sheet of paper on the hall floor may be lighter than your hand, yet if it is outside the moving boundary, it cannot flutter, fold, or slide. A feather may be as immovable as a stone, because motion is not a matter of weight alone. It is a matter of permission. The hallway beyond the door is dim. A ceiling light glows halfway down, its illumination fixed across the walls. The shadows do not tremble. A neighbor stands by the elevator, one arm extended toward the button, the fingertip almost touching it. The elevator doors are partly open, holding the narrow, dark line of the shaft between them. Inside, a man in a blue jacket looks down at a watch that has not finished marking the second. The sight of other people changes everything. A silent street can feel abandoned. A silent hallway filled with human bodies feels haunted by presence. Their faces carry expressions that were never meant to last. A blink halfway closed, a smile beginning, a frown forming in response to a thought that has not completed itself. These are not statues. They are living people caught at a point in their processes, and that makes them more vulnerable in the imagination than any sleeping crowd. You step close to the neighbor at the elevator, careful not to touch. There is no breath clouding from
his mouth, no slight movement of the chest, no tiny adjustment of balance. If time is stopped for him, he is not suffering. His brain is not waiting in darkness. His lungs are not yearning for air, because yearning is a process too. Yet your own mind cannot help reading his stillness as danger. A human face without motion feels like a question the body urgently wants answered. The elevator button is lit, but the glow does not pulse. If the elevator was moving when time stopped, perhaps it is suspended between floors with people inside, bodies held upright by the last arrangement of forces. If power is frozen too, the circuits are locked in their last state. Electricity, like sound and breath, is not magic. It is the movement of charge, changes in fields, a sequence of interactions. Stop time, and the bright modern city becomes a collection of halted processes. Downstairs, the lobby opens toward the street. The glass doors reveal more of the suspended rain. You move slowly, because panic would only waste breath. The air around you remains breathable for now, but the word "for now" begins to matter. Every breath you take changes the local air. You draw in oxygen, release carbon dioxide, add moisture and warmth. Normally,
The atmosphere mixes these changes away. In a small, moving pocket surrounded by stillness, the balance may not last forever. A human body at rest consumes oxygen continuously. The amount changes with activity, but the principle never stops. Cells use oxygen in chemical reactions that release energy. Carbon dioxide must be carried away. Heat must be managed. The body depends on exchange. If your bubble contains only a limited amount of air, then survival is measured not by clocks outside, but by the chemistry inside your boundary. The stopped world does not age, but you do. At the lobby doors, you reach for the metal bar. It moves only a little before pressing into the stopped air outside. Through the glass, the street seems close enough to enter, yet it is sealed by the very medium that normally makes entry possible. The rain beyond the door is not falling on the city. It is occupying fixed positions in space. The puddles on the pavement hold ripples that never flatten. A splash near the curb has become a crown of water, sharp and delicate. Water is another lesson. It looks soft because its molecules move easily past one another. Pour it from a glass, and gravity shapes it into a stream. Touch a lake, and waves carry the disturbance outward. But water outside time cannot pour, ripple, or yield. A floating droplet might appear fragile, yet if it cannot change, it is not available to be disturbed. The softness of the world is a behavior, not just a substance. Farther down the avenue, headlights form white tunnels through the rain. A bus is stopped at an angle, its passengers visible through the windows. One man holds a handrail. A woman's head leans toward the glass. A child points at something outside, the gesture interrupted. Nobody inside knows that anything has happened. From their point of view, if time ever resumes, the bus ride will continue without a memory of the pause. The terror belongs only to the observer who was left out of stillness. The primal mind does not accept that easily. It says they are trapped. It says they need help. It says, move, shout, break the door, do something. This instinct is ancient and useful in fires, floods, and accidents, but here it has no proper target. There is no enemy to fight, no wound to bind, no falling object to catch, unless your bubble can include it. The event is not happening inside time, and so normal rescue belongs to a world that has temporarily stopped existing. Still, the imagination begins making plans. If a person was about to be hit by a car, perhaps you could move them. If someone was falling, perhaps you could push a cushion beneath them. If a candle was about to ignite a curtain, perhaps you could remove it. Stopped time creates the illusion of infinite opportunity, as if every accident has been paused for correction. But each intervention would depend on what can be moved, what becomes part of your time, and what consequences unfold when the world returns. You look toward the crossing. A car has entered the intersection against the shining road. A pedestrian is halfway through a step. In ordinary time, perhaps there would be no collision. Perhaps the car would brake. Perhaps the person would hurry. Perhaps the timing would be harmless.
Frozen moments can be misleading because they remove the next piece of information. A photograph of danger is not always danger. Without the future, judgment becomes uncertain. The city, seen this way, is not one event, but millions of incomplete events layered together. Meals half prepared, arguments half spoken, elevators half arrived, trains entering tunnels, surgeons leaning over patients,
teachers writing unfinished words on boards, babies taking half of a breath. Somewhere, a plane is crossing a band of cloud, its wings held in a balance that depends on speed, air pressure, and control surfaces. Somewhere, a wave stands above a beach without breaking. A world stopped in a single instant would preserve not only beauty, but risk. Modern life is full of systems that are safe because they keep updating. Traffic lights change, pilots adjust, computers correct, hearts regulate, power grids balance supply and demand moment by moment. Remove the moments, and the systems become frozen expressions of trust. Nothing fails while time is absent, because failure itself requires change. But nothing is protected either. Protection also requires change. You move back from the door and choose the stairs. The stairwell is easier, perhaps because the air within it is partly drawn into your moving boundary as you pass, or perhaps because the thought experiment allows a small region around you to remain active. Every scenario needs rules. The more generous the bubble, the more the world resembles a paused film. The stricter the bubble, the more impossible survival becomes. The truth is that a complete stop of time leaves no room for adventure. Only an exception gives a story anywhere to stand. On the second-floor landing, an apartment door is open. Inside, a family dinner is suspended around a table. A spoon hangs just above a bowl. Steam above the food stands in pale, twisting shapes, no longer rising. The faces around the table hold tiny expressions of ordinary life. Someone was laughing. Someone was listening. Someone was reaching for bread. It is almost unbearably intimate. Not because anything dramatic is happening, but because nothing is. The catastrophe has invaded the most normal second imaginable. This is where the human impact becomes clearer. Disasters often announce themselves by breaking the ordinary. A house collapses, the sea withdraws, the sky darkens. But stopped time would preserve the ordinary so completely that it would become sacred and frightening. The half-smile, the lifted cup, the unfinished sentence, all of it would reveal how exposed human life is inside the flow of seconds. We do not live in grand chapters. We live in small continuations. On the table, a candle flame is frozen. It does not flicker. A flame is usually a rapid chemical reaction, fuel combining with oxygen, heat rising, gases expanding, light emitted. It seems almost alive because it constantly changes shape. Here, it has become a sculpture of combustion. If time resumes, the flame will continue consuming wax and air. Until then, it is not burning in any ordinary sense. It is the image of burning, preserved at one instant. That distinction matters. In a stopped world, a dangerous thing may not be dangerous until time returns. A falling knife is not cutting. A crashing car is not crashing. A virus is not replicating. A fire is not spreading. For those outside your bubble, the pause is not an experience of threat, but the suspension of threat. The danger gathers in relation to the restart, and in relation to you, the one person who may be able to alter the arrangement before motion comes back. You step into the corridor again. The stairwell window shows a flock of birds above the rooftops, each wing fixed at a different angle. Birds are masters of time. Their flight is a continuous negotiation with air, lift, drag, muscle, balance, correction. Frozen, they look like decorations pinned to the sky. Yet each one is held inside an equation of motion that has been interrupted. If time resumes smoothly, the wings will beat again. If it resumes unevenly, even the sky could become a place of accidents. But uneven resumption is another uncertainty. Thought experiments about stopped time often imagine a clean pause and a clean restart, because the alternative becomes too chaotic. In physics, motion is tied to momentum, energy, fields, and interactions. If objects kept their previous states and simply continued, the world might proceed as if no time had
passed for most observers. But if the exception allowed you to push, move, heat, cool, or displace objects, then the restart would include changes with no ordinary cause inside the frozen frame. A security camera in the hallway might later show nothing unusual if it too was frozen, or it might show a missing interval, or if it somehow belonged to active time, it might record a single figure moving through a world that did not move at all. The evidence would depend on the rules of the anomaly. The deeper you think about stopped time, the more it becomes not one question, but many questions about what exactly has stopped. Clocks, motion, fields, perception, entropy, causality. The stairwell opens onto the roof. The door is heavy, but within your moving region, it yields. Outside, the city spreads in every direction beneath a sky cut by motionless rain. The clouds hang low and textured. The lights of thousands of windows burn without flicker. Roads curve between buildings, filled with vehicles whose journeys have been interrupted so neatly that the city almost looks peaceful from above. It could be a model, a miniature city sealed beneath glass. If the entire planet were stopped, the atmosphere would be stopped with it. Weather would cease. Winds would no longer carry heat from one region to another. Clouds would no longer form or dissolve. Ocean waves would hold their shapes. Rivers would stop, not because gravity vanished, but because change had been denied. The Earth would still be there, massive and round, but its living surface would be locked in the posture of a single instant. Your own shadow on the roof seems steady. No wind moves your clothes. No distant siren rises from the avenues. You look down and see a construction crane fixed above an unfinished building. A load of materials hangs from its cable, motionless in the air. Beneath it, workers are paused in bright vests. Normally, a suspended load is dangerous because it may fall. Now, it is dangerous because it will, one day, be allowed to finish whatever gravity was asking of it. Gravity itself is not usually described as needing time in the same everyday way as sound or wind, but the effects we observe unfold through time. A falling object is an object changing position. A body under weight is a body responding through forces. The stopped world may still contain relationships like mass and position, but it does not permit the story those relationships would normally tell. The crane load is not safe. It is simply untranslated into consequence. A few streets away, blue and red lights are frozen around an ambulance. The vehicle is stopped at an intersection, angled between lanes. Its siren, if it was on, no longer travels. Inside, paramedics may be leaning over someone whose emergency has been suspended. That patient is not worsening if their biology is stopped, but they are also not improving. Medicine is the art of guiding change. Circulation, oxygen, clotting, infection, healing, drug action. Without time, treatment becomes a still image of intention. Awareness is the dividing line. It turns a pause into an ordeal. For the frozen, there is no duration. For you, duration continues. The same event is nothing to them and everything to you. This asymmetry is perhaps the most unsettling part of the thought experiment. It creates a private apocalypse,
a disaster of one consciousness surrounded by a world that will not acknowledge it. This difference between measured duration and experienced duration is subtle, but important. Time in physics can be treated as part of the structure of events. Time in human life is felt as sequence, memory, anticipation. A clock can count seconds, but a person inhabits them. In the stopped city, the clocks outside display positions. Your mind alone, if alone, continues to make a before and an after. A movement catches your eye, or seems to. For a moment, your body reacts before thought. There, near the edge of another rooftop, a shape. But it is only a sheet of plastic lifted by wind that no longer blows, fixed in a curve that resembles motion. The brain is hungry for change. In a motionless world, it may begin to find false movement in shape, shadow, and expectation. This is not weakness. It is perception doing what it evolved to do: detect life, danger, and opportunity before certainty arrives. The fear of being alone is old. Long before cities, long before clocks, a human separated from the group faced cold, predators, injury, and
Darkness without help. The stopped world recreates that ancient fear in the most modern setting possible. You are surrounded by apartment towers, streetlights, phones, vehicles, and people, yet none of them can join you. The tribe is visible and unreachable. The city becomes a cave with millions of statues. You return inside before the roof begins to feel too exposed. The stairwell welcomes you with its narrow walls and fixed shadows. Down one floor, the family at dinner remains exactly as before. The candle flame holds its shape. The orange light rests on their faces. You pause at the doorway and notice a tiny detail you missed before. One person's hand is reaching beneath the table toward another hand, a private gesture, nearly hidden, preserved in the same impossible amber as the falling orange and the rain. Moments like this are why the question of stopped time is not only frightening, it is revealing. It strips life down to dependence. We depend on air moving, light arriving, sound traveling, blood circulating, other faces changing, machines updating, and the next instant being available. We rarely notice this generosity because it is constant. Time passes so reliably that we mistake it for emptiness. Only when it stops do we see that it was holding everything. Back in your room, the same glass of water rests on the table. A few minutes ago, it looked ordinary. Now, it seems like a small laboratory of the possible. If it is inside your active region, you can lift it, tilt it, drink. If it crosses the boundary, perhaps the water will lock in place. If you carry it outward, perhaps your bubble carries its contents too. The rules must be discovered carefully, because in this world, every experiment is also a risk. You extend a hand toward a dust mote floating beyond the lamp's warm center. Close to your fingers, it begins to drift. Farther away, others remain fixed. The moving zone may be small, perhaps no more than the reach of your body and the air nearest your skin. You breathe slowly and realize how fragile that makes everything. The universe has not become your playground. It has become a narrow corridor through an infinite locked room. If you were to touch one of the frozen people, the problem would become even deeper. A human body is not one object in the simple sense. It is blood, air, electrical signals, chemical gradients, fluid pressures, delicate tissues, microbes, heat, and consciousness. To move a person safely, you would need their entire body to re-enter time coherently.
If only the surface moved, the result would be unimaginable and not something to test. So you do not test it. Respect becomes a form of survival. The same caution applies to objects in motion. A falling cup might appear easy to catch, but if only part of it enters active time, or if it keeps its previous momentum when released, it may behave unexpectedly. A car frozen at speed is not merely a parked car. It is an interrupted moving system, full of stored relationships between engine, wheels, road, and driver. Stopped time hides motion, but may not erase it. The past is still written into positions. This means the first minute is not for heroics. It is for listening, even when there is nothing to hear. It is for noticing the limits of the exception. It is for understanding that panic wants simple actions, while the world now demands careful ones. You cannot save a city by rushing through it without knowing what your touch does. You cannot help the frozen by assuming they are asleep. You cannot trust abundance, distance, or silence to mean what they meant before. The room feels smaller now, but also safer. The bed, the table, the lamp, the glass, the phone, these are the first territory of the new reality. A human in an unknown environment begins by mapping the near. Where is air? Where is water? What can move? What cannot? What changes when touched? What remains sealed? In ancient forests and modern disasters alike, survival begins with the same humble act, paying attention. Outside, the rain remains pinned in the night. The city holds its breath without breathing. 1,000 unfinished gestures fill the buildings around you, and beyond them, millions more, spreading outward across the planet. Somewhere, waves are raised but unbroken. Somewhere, lightning may be branching across the sky without completing its flash. Somewhere, a person is about to say a name, and that name has not yet entered the world. You stand at the window.
Again, closer this time, but not too close. One droplet hangs just beyond the glass, bright with the reflected light of the room. It is so small that it should mean nothing, yet it contains the whole mystery. A drop of water falls only because time lets position change, gravity act, air resist, surface tension tremble, and impact arrive. Remove the sequence, and even the simplest thing becomes impossible. Your reflection floats over the city in the dark pane. Unlike the people below, your face continues to change. Your eyes move, your chest rises. A thought becomes another thought. That difference is terrifying, but it is also the only tool you have. While the rest of the world is held in a single frame, you can still learn. You can still choose. You can still make the next careful movement. And so, the first task is not to solve the mystery all at once. It is to remain alive long enough to understand the shape of it. The stopped second has opened around you like a vast museum of unfinished life. But museums do not feed the living, and beauty does not provide air. Beyond the window, the frozen city waits without waiting, full of food that may not be edible, water that may not flow, doors that may not open, and people who may not be reachable. The first impossible minute is ending for you alone, and the next question is no longer what has happened to the world. It is how anyone could live inside it. Living inside it begins with the smallest experiment. You do not run into the street. You do not try to wake the frozen city.
You stand in the room and choose one object, something harmless, something close enough to belong to your breathing space. The glass of water on the table becomes the first instrument. Its surface is calm, not because the whole world is calm, but because within this narrow pocket of moving time, the water is allowed to behave like water. When you lift it, the weight settles into your hand, and that ordinary weight feels almost miraculous. You tilt the glass carefully. The water slides toward your lips. It pours because, for the moment, the glass and the water have joined your exception. Gravity can draw the liquid downward. Surface tension can break and reform. Your throat can swallow. Muscles contract in sequence, and the water passes into a body that is still writing its story, one chemical step at a time. Drinking has never seemed like an achievement before, yet here it feels like proof that some small part of the universe has not abandoned causality. But the comfort lasts only until you imagine the same glass beyond the edge of your bubble. If you pushed it through the boundary and released it, would the water freeze in midair as soon as it left you? Would the stream become a curved sculpture of droplets, each one locked in the shape it had at the instant time stopped again? Or would the moving region extend around the object for a while, like warmth carried away from a flame? No known physics gives a simple answer, because the premise itself is beyond known physics. The only honest path is caution. The strange thing about this world is that it turns every object into a question about contact. A chair is no longer only a chair. It is an arrangement of atoms that may or may not respond when touched. A cupboard door is not merely open or closed. It is a test of whether wood, hinge, air, and your hand can share the same temporary permission to change. A loaf of bread is not simply food. It is chemistry, softness, moisture, starch, air pockets, and time, all waiting to discover whether they can enter your moving now. You approach the kitchen as if entering a laboratory. The refrigerator light is on, but nothing hums behind it. A refrigerator normally makes a room feel domestic because it is always quietly working. It pumps heat from inside to outside. It cycles, clicks, vibrates, fails, corrects, and rests. Now the light is only an image of function. If the circuits outside your bubble are frozen, the compressor is not preserving the cold. It is paused in the middle of preserving it. The food inside will not spoil while stopped, but it will not serve you easily either. The door opens when you pull it, perhaps because your hand carries the active zone through the handle and hinges. Inside, vegetables sit in their drawer, milk waits in its carton, and a container of leftovers holds a meal from an ordinary evening that now seems impossibly distant. The cold air does not spill out in the familiar way.
Comes only where your moving bubble allows it to move. Beyond that, the interior is a still chamber of suspended temperatures, less like a refrigerator and more like a memory of one. Food reveals the deeper problem of survival. At first, the frozen world seems full of supplies. Supermarkets, restaurants, pantries, warehouses, vending machines, kitchens, farms, and oceans are all still present. Nothing rots if its molecules cannot proceed through the reactions of decay. Nothing is consumed by bacteria if bacterial life is paused as well. But preservation is not usefulness. Food feeds you only because it can be changed. Teeth crush it. Saliva begins digestion. Stomach acid unfolds proteins. Enzymes cut long molecules into smaller ones.
Cells eventually turn those molecules into energy. If a piece of bread entered your active zone completely, you might eat it, but if only its surface softened while its interior remained locked outside time, it would be more like biting into an impossible stone. If it became active, then it would also become perishable, warmable, tearable, digestible. The boundary between useful matter and untouchable matter would define your world more powerfully than walls or roads. You would not ask where the food is. You would ask what portion of it can join you. In this careful version of the thought experiment, anything held close may become active enough to use. This is generous, but not limitless. It means survival is possible for a while, yet every act of gathering becomes slow. You must bring food into your bubble, wait for it to behave normally, prepare it with tools that can also move, and avoid disturbing frozen systems too large to understand. The world contains abundance, but abundance trapped outside change is almost the same as absence. A supermarket would be one of the strangest places to enter. The automatic doors might be open already, or they might be closed behind a wall of still air and inactive sensors. Inside, aisles would stretch beneath lights that do not flicker. Carts would stand where hands left them. A packet of pasta might be falling from a shelf, frozen at an angle. A cashier might hold a receipt between two fingers. A customer might be reaching for a wallet. A child might stare at a bright box of cereal, caught in desire before decision. The shelves would be full, but the place would not feel safe. Supermarkets are designed around movement. People pass, compare, choose, pay, leave. Refrigerated cases breathe cold air. Freezers hum. Doors sigh open and closed. Plastic packaging crinkles. Wheels tap across tile. Without those small sounds, the abundance becomes theatrical, like a stage set after the actors have been removed from time. You can take what you need only if you can make it part of your moving island, and every package you touch becomes a tiny negotiation with the laws of the anomaly. Water matters sooner than food. A human body can live longer without eating than without drinking, although exact survival varies with temperature, health, activity, and many other factors. In the stopped world, the question is not whether water exists. It is everywhere, in pipes, bottles, rivers, clouds, tanks, puddles, and the frozen rain outside. The question is whether it can flow, pour, enter, and leave the body. Water in a sealed bottle may be easier than water in a pipe, because opening plumbing might require an entire network to respond. You turn a tap, and nothing happens at first. The handle moves, but the pipe system beyond the wall may be frozen. Water pressure in normal plumbing depends on reservoirs, pumps, gravity, valves, and the movement of liquid through pipes. If all of that is outside active time, the tap is a mouth connected to a sleeping body. A few drops trapped within the portion of pipe close to your bubble might come out, then nothing. Civilization has hidden water inside systems, and systems are difficult to borrow from a universe that has stopped. Bottled water becomes precious because it is local. You can lift it, open it, carry it, drink it. In ordinary life, a plastic bottle is an unremarkable object. Here, it is almost a survival capsule, a sealed volume of usable chemistry. Each bottle contains not just water, but independence from a frozen infrastructure. The same is true of canned food, batteries, blankets, matches, hand tools, paper maps, and anything that can function without asking the wider world to wake up. Electricity is less forgiving.
Lamp may keep shining if it was already within your active zone, or if the light present in the room is somehow preserved. But a modern electrical grid is a continuous balancing act. Power is generated, transmitted, transformed, consumed, adjusted. Alternating current changes direction many times each second. Electronics rely on signals moving through circuits, transistors switching, clocks ticking at enormous speeds. If time outside the bubble is frozen, a phone, router, computer, or elevator cannot simply participate from a distance. Your phone may still glow in your hand because it is close enough to you, but it cannot speak to the network. A message typed into it remains private. Radio waves require time to travel. Cell towers require functioning electronics. Servers require processors executing instructions. Satellites require communication links, power management, and orbital motion. The device can display stored information, but the wider web has become a library, with every page sealed shut at once. There is a peculiar sadness in that. Modern humans are rarely alone with an event, a strange noise, a storm, a blackout, a public emergency, a beautiful sunset, a fear in the middle of the night. All can be shared instantly. You reach for the phone before you think. You ask the world to confirm the world. But in the stopped city, the most connected object in your pocket becomes a mirror. It can show your face, your old messages, your battery level, maybe a downloaded map, but it cannot deliver your fear to anyone. You type anyway. It is a human gesture, not a rational one. The words appear beneath your fingers, each letter a small act of ongoing time. I am here. Something happened. The message waits under the name of someone you love. It cannot leave, yet writing it steadies you, because language organizes panic into sequence. Even an unsent message proves that thought is still moving. It creates a record for a possible future, a thread thrown across a gap that no signal can cross yet. The body remains the most urgent system. It does not care that the city is beautiful. It wants oxygen, water, warmth, and rest. If your bubble moves with you, then perhaps it draws a small amount of surrounding air into activity as you pass. If it does not, then every breath depletes a finite supply. A calm adult breathes many times each minute, though breathing rate changes with stress, effort, and health. Panic would waste oxygen faster. Running would heat the body, increase carbon dioxide, and make the moving island feel smaller. So you slow down. You discover that stillness is not only outside you, it must be practiced inside you as well. A stopped world punishes frantic motion. It rewards careful steps, deliberate breathing, attention to small changes. The air near your face feels normal. The air near the door feels heavy. Your lungs become instruments, measuring the size of the place in which life continues. Every inhale is a quiet question. How much of the atmosphere is still available? Heat is another invisible dependency. Your body produces heat through metabolism and loses it through radiation, convection, conduction, and evaporation. In normal conditions, air carries warmth away from the skin. Sweat evaporates. Blood vessels widen or narrow. Clothing traps insulating layers of air. Rooms warm or cool through exchanges too complex to notice. But if the surrounding environment cannot exchange energy normally, comfort may change in strange ways. Too little heat loss could become dangerous. Too much exposure to a cold, active region could drain the body. The details would depend entirely on the rules of the bubble.
If heat can radiate beyond it, you may cool normally. If surrounding air cannot circulate, sweat may not evaporate properly. If frozen objects cannot accept thermal energy until activated, touching them might be unlike touching ordinary cold metal or stone. The science becomes uncertain because stopped time is not a condition we can test, yet the principle is clear. Temperature is not a static number. It is a description of microscopic motion and energy exchange. Life depends on exchange. Sleep, strangely, becomes both necessary and frightening. To survive, the brain must rest, but sleep means surrendering the only active awareness in the world. In ordinary darkness, people sleep because the world continues without requiring them to monitor every second. Here, if you sleep, no one else watches. The frozen people
will not wake you. Sirens will not warn you. A fire will not spread while stopped, perhaps, but your own air, heat, thirst, and fear continue. Sleep becomes a negotiation with vulnerability. You might choose a small room close to water, away from stairwells, away from frozen strangers whose stillness presses too heavily on the mind. You might open containers, gather supplies within reach, test a flashlight, place your phone beside you, though it has no network, and write down observations on paper, because paper does not need a signal. The first shelter is not a fortress. It is a pocket of the world that you have slowly taught yourself to understand. Yet no shelter removes the knowledge of the others. In the apartment next door, the dinner continues without continuing. In the hallway, the neighbor's finger remains near the elevator button. Downstairs, the taxi driver looks into a mirror that no longer gives him anything new. The frozen city is not empty, and because it is not empty, it refuses to become simple. Every survival choice happens beside the faces of people who cannot consent, cannot thank, cannot warn, cannot be asked what they need. Hospitals would be the most painful places to imagine. They are built around urgency, refined into method. Monitors watch pulses. Nurses respond to alarms. Surgeons follow anatomy through seconds that matter. Ventilators move air for lungs that cannot do it alone. Intravenous pumps deliver measured amounts of medicine. Newborns cry. Families wait. In a stopped world, all of that care is preserved but inactive. A hospital becomes a cathedral of interrupted intervention. For the patients frozen outside your time, the pause may not hurt. A person under anesthesia does not experience the frozen interval. A person in pain has no new moment in which to feel it. A failing heart does not worsen if its chemistry is stopped. But the meaning of care changes when only one observer is moving. You can see emergencies without knowing which are truly emergencies. A surgical instrument may be in mid-gesture because everything is proceeding normally, not because something is wrong. A monitor line may show a rhythm that would make sense only if it could continue. This is the trap of partial knowledge. A frozen frame can be read incorrectly. A doctor leaning over a patient may look desperate or calm, depending on the angle of the face. An ambulance crossing an intersection may be seconds from saving someone or already carrying someone stable. Without the moving context, every scene invites interpretation, and interpretation can lead to dangerous action. To help wisely, you would need knowledge, time, and access to systems that time has denied you. Aircraft introduce a different scale of fear. A plane in flight is not hanging by magic.
It remains aloft because its wings move through air, creating lift through pressure differences and deflecting air downward, while engines provide thrust and control surfaces adjust its path. If the plane and surrounding air are frozen, no one inside experiences falling. The aircraft is held in an unfinished aerodynamic moment. But if time resumes cleanly, it continues. If something has changed around it, or if the restart is uneven, the consequences could be severe. From the ground, a frozen airplane would look impossible, almost serene against the clouds, a silver body held above the city, contrails fixed behind it, landing lights shining in the dark. Yet serenity comes from ignorance of motion. That plane may be climbing, descending, turning, or approaching a runway. Hundreds of people inside may be reading, sleeping, waiting for drinks, holding a child, looking out at the lights below. None of them can know the sky has been interrupted. Cars are more intimate because they fill the street around you. A moving car stores danger in its speed, but speed is hidden when the vehicle is stopped. If you saw 1 inches from a pedestrian, you might assume collision is certain, but perhaps the driver was already braking. Perhaps the pedestrian was already clear. Perhaps the apparent danger is a trick of perspective. The stopped city denies the next half-second, and often the next half-second is what tells whether a scene is harmless or fatal. If you had the power to move things, the temptation to correct the world would grow. You could shift a bicycle away from a bus, pull a child back from a curb, move a knife from the edge of a counter, close a gas valve if it could.
Move, lower a candle, open a door, place pillows beneath a falling body. Each act would feel small and kind, but kindness without understanding can become interference. When time resumes, a moved object enters a chain of causes you cannot fully predict. This is the moral weight of being the only moving thing. You are not given omniscience, only mobility. You see fragments. You guess. You project fear onto still images. The old fantasy of stopped time imagines freedom from consequence, but a realistic version would be filled with consequence delayed. The world is not a toy paused on a screen. It is a planet of unfinished lives, every one connected to others through invisible sequences of cause. You walk through a street at last, but only by moving slowly through whatever air your bubble can activate. The rain closest to your face softens and falls, perhaps for a second, then joins the wet sheen on your coat. Beyond your reach, the drops remain fixed. This creates a narrow tunnel of weather around you, a private rainfall inside a suspended storm. Each step changes the boundary. Droplets enter, move, strike, and vanish behind you into the pavement if the ground is active enough, while others remain like stars in the dark air. The sensation is beautiful and claustrophobic. You are not walking through the world. You are carrying a little world through a larger one. Your footsteps sound beneath you, but the sound fades quickly. Puddles ripple only near your shoes. Steam from a street vendor's cart hangs beyond your reach, then curls briefly when your shoulder passes close. The city becomes responsive only in a halo, and beyond that halo, it is as unreachable as a photograph. A restaurant window shows a room full of diners. Forks hover. Wine leans in glasses. A waiter holds a plate above a table. The kitchen behind him is a line of paused heat, knives, burners, oil, and hands. Hunger makes the scene practical at first. There is food inside.
But then you see how much work stands between food and eating. Cooking is controlled time, heat moving into ingredients, proteins denaturing, water evaporating, starches gelatinizing, fats melting, flavors diffusing. A frozen meal can look ready and still resist every process that makes it nourishment. Packaged food again becomes the wiser choice. It is humble, but dependable. Crackers, nuts, dried fruit, bottled water, anything that can be carried and eaten after it fully enters your active region. Survival is often like this, even in ordinary disasters. The dramatic tools matter less than simple, reliable supplies. In the stopped world, the plainest objects become the most elegant because they ask least from the frozen systems around them. The streets also teach the value of maps. Digital navigation depends on satellites, networks, sensors, processors, and time signals. A paper map does not update, but it also does not need to. It becomes trustworthy precisely because it is limited. The modern world often makes power invisible by distributing it through systems. When systems stop, older tools reveal a different kind of strength: a printed address, a mechanical key, a manual can opener, a notebook, a match, a compass. These objects seem almost ancient, but they belong to the scale of one moving human. Still, the largest need is not only physical. The mind begins to bend under too much stillness. Humans read motion constantly. We see life in the rhythm of walking, emotion in changing eyes, safety in the responsiveness of others. A frozen face offers all the detail of a person without the reciprocity. That absence can feel more disturbing than emptiness. An empty street can be accepted as empty. A crowded street that cannot respond keeps asking the nervous system to prepare for social contact that never arrives. You begin avoiding faces, not because you do not care, but because caring without action becomes exhausting. You look at the ground, at signs, at buildings, at the rain. But even then, the human world surrounds you. A scarf caught in the air, a hand pressed to a bus window, a child's balloon floating above a square, string held by fingers that do not tighten or loosen. The evidence of lives is everywhere, and every life is paused in a way that feels private. This loneliness is not the clean loneliness of a remote landscape. It is crowded loneliness, perhaps the most unnatural kind. Our species evolved to survive by noticing others, by joining attention, by sharing alarms.
Warmth, tools, stories, and grief. In a stopped world, you are physically among the group, but temporally exiled from it. The separation is deeper than distance. Someone across an ocean can answer a message in ordinary life. Someone 1 meter away cannot answer you here. You may begin speaking to them anyway, quietly at first, a sentence to the taxi driver, an apology to the woman with the falling orange, a promise to the child at the crossing that you will not touch anything unless you are sure. These words do not reach them, but they protect something inside you. They keep the frozen people from becoming objects. They remind you that each still figure is a life, not scenery in your private disaster. Over time, if time outside remains stopped while you continue, the difference in age becomes a strange thought. You would grow older, while the world did not. Your hair would lengthen, your body would use energy, your memories would accumulate. The people around you would remain biologically unchanged until release. A single day for you would be no time for them. A week for you would be less than a blink for them. The loneliness would not only be social, it would become temporal.
a widening distance measured in lived experience. But long survival raises harder problems. Waste must leave the body, food must be found, water must be gathered, sleep must occur, tools may break, batteries may die within your active region. If you activate objects by using them, then they begin to wear, discharge, cool, warm, and decay. Everything you bring into your time becomes mortal again. In that sense, the bubble is not merely a shelter, it is a place where entropy resumes. Entropy is often described as disorder, though the full scientific idea is more precise. For this story, it is enough to think of it as the directionality of many natural processes: heat spreading, gases mixing, structures aging, energy becoming less available for work. Time and entropy are deeply connected in how we understand the arrow of time. A frozen universe has no unfolding arrow from the point of view of those frozen within it. Your bubble has one. That is why food can be eaten, batteries can drain, and fatigue can grow. A candle inside your active space would burn and consume oxygen. A flashlight would dim as chemical energy in its battery changed form. A warm drink would cool if heat could leave it. A cut on your skin would begin clotting and healing. These are comforts and dangers together. The processes that make life possible also move it toward exhaustion. In a world without shared time, every active thing joins your limited economy of change. You might eventually search for a larger active space. Perhaps open areas feel easier because there is more air to draw into motion. Perhaps underground stations feel dangerous because ventilation systems are frozen and the air seems heavy. Perhaps buildings with open courtyards become preferred shelters, allowing you to pass through more atmosphere with less resistance. The rules remain uncertain, discovered by sensation, not theory. Science begins with observation, but here, the laboratory is a city, and the experimenter is also the subject at risk. If others were also moving somewhere, finding them would be almost impossible without communication. Two active bubbles could pass near one another and never meet, or perhaps their boundaries would interact, creating the first real sound from another person, the first moving shadow at a distance, the first proof that you are not alone. The thought is comforting and painful. It gives hope, but also makes every silent avenue feel like a missed connection. Imagine calling from a rooftop into a city that cannot carry sound. Imagine leaving notes on doors, knowing no frozen person can read them yet, but another moving person might. Paper becomes a way to speak across the active world without electricity. You might write the time as you experience it, though outside clocks do not change. You might mark locations, supplies, warnings. You might build a trail through a city where only the moving can understand that a trail exists. A school would carry a different kind of weight. Classrooms would hold pencils above paper, teachers turned toward boards, students caught between boredom and attention. In one room, a hand might be raised with a question that will not be asked until time returns. In another, a child might be laughing silently at something whispered across a desk.
Schools are built on futures. Every lesson assumes later understanding, later adulthood, later memory. To see one frozen is to see the future itself paused in its smallest daily machinery. A train station would be more architectural, but no less human. Commuters would stand beneath departure boards that no longer update. A train might be halfway into the platform, doors not yet aligned, faces behind the glass. Someone would be running with a bag over one shoulder, late for a journey that has lost all meaning until motion resumes. Railway systems depend on timing with almost musical precision. Signals, switches, braking distances, schedules, passenger flow. In the stopped world, the station keeps the appearance of order, while order itself sleeps. Even money changes its nature here. A wallet, a card reader, a bank account, a cash register, all belong to agreements that require living institutions. Taking supplies from a shop might be theft in normal time, but in this frozen interval, survival has no cashier, no consent, no immediate law. You may leave notes, names, promises, careful records of what you used. It may matter later, it may not. Morality does not disappear when systems stop, but it becomes lonelier, carried by one conscience instead of a society. That loneliness makes small rituals important. You close doors gently. You avoid stepping through private rooms unless you must. You place moved objects neatly where they can be understood. These gestures cannot restore the social world, but they keep you belonging to it. They say that even in stopped time, other people remain real and worthy of careful protection. Yet even notes create questions. If time resumes, people may find them and wonder how they appeared. A page placed in a frozen hand could become evidence of intervention, but it might also cause fear. A moved object in a home could be mistaken for theft, miracle, intrusion, or dream. To leave traces is to prepare for a future explanation that may never be believed. The more you survive, the more you alter a world whose inhabitants have not consented to being altered. This is why the temptation to play God is not grand at first. It begins with tenderness. You see a man under a falling sign and want to move him. You see a stroller near the curb and want to pull it back. You see a pot boiling over and want to turn the handle. You see a person about to step into danger and want to save them from a future they cannot know is coming. The desire is humane. The uncertainty is unbearable. A cautious rule forms. Intervene only where the danger is clear, simple, and immediate, and where the intervention is unlikely to create a worse chain. Move a sharp object away from a child if it can be moved safely. Clear a small obstacle from the path of someone falling. Do not drag bodies unless you understand how your bubble affects them. Do not enter aircraft. Do not disturb operating rooms. Do not move vehicles. Do not assume that a dramatic frame tells the whole story. The rule does not remove guilt. It only makes action possible. Survival in the stopped world is partly the art of accepting that you cannot fix everything you can see. This is true in ordinary life as well, but time normally helps by hiding most crises from view. Here, the city displays thousands of unfinished vulnerabilities at once. The human mind was not built to carry so many almost events. As hours pass for you, the stopped world becomes less spectacular and more practical. You learn which doors open. You learn how far your voice travels. You learn that bottled water is easier than plumbing, stairs safer than elevators, paper more reliable than networks, simple food better than kitchens, open rooms better than sealed corridors. You learn to move slowly through crowds, because a frozen elbow or bag can be as fixed as architecture until your boundary includes it. You learn that respect and caution are not moral luxuries, they are navigation. The city still has beauty. Moonlight rests on the suspended rain. A fountain holds its spray in a crown of silver beads. Leaves in a park are fixed in the shape of wind. A dog in mid-leap seems almost joyful.
forever reaching for a ball that hangs just ahead of its mouth. These images calm you for moments at a time. They show the world not as dead, but paused at such high resolution that every overlooked motion becomes visible. But beauty cannot answer the central problem. Living requires participation from the
environment. You are not a ghost drifting through matter. You are an organism with needs. The more you move, the more obvious it becomes that human independence is an illusion created by functioning systems. The air, water, food, warmth, language, medicine, power, and companionship that sustain a person are all networks of motion. Stop the networks, and the individual is revealed as fragile. Eventually, you return to the apartment where the first minute began, carrying what you could gather: bottles, simple food, a notebook, a flashlight, a jacket, perhaps a mechanical tool, perhaps a map. The room no longer feels like the place where the mystery started. It feels like the first camp on an impossible expedition. Beyond the window, the city remains fixed. Inside, a small circle of objects has joined your time and begun to age with you. You arrange them carefully: water near the bed, food on the table, notes by the lamp, a path to the door. The act of organizing creates a kind of order against the vast suspended disorder outside. It is a deeply human act. In forests, deserts, ships, caves, polar stations, and disaster zones, humans make small arrangements and call them safety. A line of supplies becomes a promise that the next hour can be managed. Still, the question of return grows heavier. If time never restarts, survival becomes a slow narrowing of options. If it restarts suddenly, every altered object may matter. The orange may fall, the cyclist may crash, the ambulance may continue through the intersection, the plane may descend, the candle may resume burning, the people you love may blink and never know how long you stood beside them. Your private duration may vanish from the public story of the world. You look again at the unsent message on the phone. The battery has dropped slightly because here, in your hand, chemistry continues. The message remains waiting. Its failure is no longer surprising. It is simply another sign that connection requires more than desire. It requires a path through time. And as the room settles into its narrow, living quiet, another thought arrives with the calm force of inevitability. Perhaps the real danger is not only how to survive while the world is stopped. Perhaps the greater danger is what happens when all the motion you have been walking among is released again, when every suspended drop, wheel, wing, flame, voice, and heartbeat is allowed to continue from the place where it was interrupted. For you, hours may have passed. For everyone else, the next instant is still waiting to begin. Then, at first, nothing seems to change. The room holds its breath in the same impossible way. The phone waits with its unsent message. The rain beyond the window remains pinned to the dark glass of the city. For a while, you cannot tell whether the world is still locked or whether your own mind has become so used to the stillness that it no longer expects anything else. The most frightening changes are sometimes not the loud ones. Sometimes they begin as a doubt at the edge of a tension, a tiny suspicion that the silence has altered its shape. It is the water that moves first. One droplet, resting just beyond the window, trembles. It does not fall immediately. It seems almost to remember falling, as if the law that governed it has returned from a great distance and must find its place again. Then it slides downward,
slowly at first, catching a thread of streetlight, dragging a thin silver trail across the glass. A second droplet follows, then another. Across the avenue, the suspended rain begins to loosen, not as a storm all at once, but as countless small decisions becoming possible again. The first sound arrives like a touch, not a crash, not a siren, not the roar of the whole city waking at the same moment, but a faint tick from somewhere in the room, perhaps the wall clock, perhaps the settling of a pipe, perhaps only your own body realizing that sound has found space to travel again. After so much absolute silence, even the smallest noise feels intimate and enormous. It proves that air has become air again, not only a substance in the room, but a messenger. Then the city inhales. Tires hiss on wet pavement. A horn resumes in the middle of a tone, already old before it becomes new. The elevator in the hallway completes a soft mechanical shudder. Somewhere below, a door shuts. The world does not explain itself. It simply continues. The rain falls. The lights flicker in their ordinary
Rhythms. The streets regain their depth, and the invisible machinery of cause and effect begins turning again, as if it had never stopped. For everyone else, that is exactly what has happened. Nothing, no lost hour, no strange silence, no frozen faces. The driver in the taxi glances at the mirror and continues guiding the car through the rain. The woman outside the grocery store finishes her step, feels the orange slip from her bag, and watches it bounce once on the wet pavement. The cyclist near the curb either regains balance or falls, not knowing that the moment before impact was held in place for a time only you experienced. In their lives, the pause does not exist. This may be the cleanest and most unsettling version of the return. A perfect resumption would leave no memory in the frozen minds, because memory requires change. The brain stores experience through physical and chemical processes, through shifting patterns of activity and connection. If those processes were halted, no record of the halt could be formed. A person cannot remember a duration they did not live through. From the inside, the stopped interval would be thinner than sleep, thinner than a blink. It would have no interior. You, however, carry it. Your body has crossed a private distance the rest of the world did not travel. Your muscles are tired. Your mouth is dry. Your notes are written. The bottle of water on the table is less full. The phone battery has dropped. These small traces are more convincing than any theory because they belong to ordinary time. They are the evidence of metabolism, effort, and thought. While the city was held in a single instant, you continued spending yourself second by second. The unsent message suddenly leaves. The phone finds a signal, then another, then a flood of delayed possibilities. Perhaps the message goes out with no indication that anything extraordinary has occurred. To the person receiving it, it may look confused, dramatic, maybe even ordinary, in the way late-night fear can seem ordinary once the morning comes. How could you explain that the words were written in a world where no reply could have traveled back? How could you prove an absence that no instrument outside your bubble could have measured? If the anomaly left no obvious physical trace, then the event would become almost impossible to share. You could describe the rain standing still, the people in the hall, the pressure of the air at the door, the silence without echo, the faces suspended in their unfinished expressions. But description is not proof. Human beings are generous with stories, but cautious with reality. A listener might hear trauma, a dream, exhaustion, a neurological event, a hallucination, a strange episode of panic.
They might care deeply and still not believe the world stopped. That disbelief would not necessarily be cruel. Science depends on evidence that can be examined, repeated, compared, and tested. An event that stops the conditions of measurement hides from measurement by its very nature. If every clock stops, no clock can count the missing time. If every camera stops, no camera can record the pause. If every observer stops, no observer can report it. Only an exception could witness the event, and the exception is precisely what makes the witness difficult to understand. But the world might not return perfectly. That is the darker possibility. Anything you moved while the city slept would become part of the public world again. A bottle taken from a shelf would be missing. A note placed on a table would appear where no one had seen it placed. A door opened during the pause would suddenly be open. A candle moved away from a curtain would resume burning in a safer position. A child pulled back from a curb would blink and find themselves standing somewhere they do not remember stepping. At first, the changes might seem small. A customer in a supermarket notices that a stack of bottles has shifted. A family at dinner sees a new page on the table with handwriting no one recognizes. A driver brakes because something is suddenly in the road, though no one saw it arrive. Security systems may show gaps, but if they were frozen too, the gaps would say almost nothing. The world would be full of tiny inconsistencies, each one too strange to accept and too isolated to explain. The most powerful evidence would come from systems that compare time. Modern civilization is threaded with clocks, phones, servers, satellites, financial
Networks, power grids, laboratories, hospitals, cameras, transport systems. If all of them stopped together and resumed together, they might agree with one another and disagree only with nothing outside the event. But if any system remained partially active, or if different regions resumed unevenly, discrepancies could appear. Scientists would not immediately announce that time had stopped. They would first search for instrument failure, software errors, power events, electromagnetic interference, or human mistakes. That is how careful knowledge usually begins, not with wonder, but with skepticism. Researchers would ask what was recorded, what was not recorded, whether the same anomaly appeared in independent instruments, whether physical processes were interrupted in a measurable way. They would look for patterns in data, not because data is more meaningful than human experience, but because data can outlive argument. A single story can be dismissed. 1,000 synchronized irregularities become harder to ignore. Yet even then, the phrase "time stopped" would be difficult. In physics, time is woven into the structure of events. The theories that describe the universe do not treat it like a simple switch that can be turned off in one room and left on in another without consequences. Relativity shows that time is not absolute in the old intuitive sense. It can pass differently depending on motion and gravity. But that is not the same as the whole world freezing while one person walks through it. The scenario remains speculative, a doorway for understanding dependence rather than a prediction of a known natural event. What makes the thought experiment valuable is not that it is likely. It is that it clarifies the invisible. It shows that sound is not merely sound, but air in sequence. Breath is not merely breath, but pressure, chemistry, muscle, and exchange. Sight is not merely sight, but light arriving. Society is not merely buildings and devices, but countless synchronized processes. A city is not its streets. It is timing, traffic timing, work timing, hospital timing, emotional timing,
the timing of one voice answering another before loneliness grows too large. If the world resumed with no disaster, the relief would be immense and strangely private. You would hear people continue conversations that had been frozen for hours from your perspective. Someone would finish laughing, someone would complain about the rain, someone would ask why you look pale. The normality of their voices might feel almost violent. After moving through a city of statues, the return of ordinary human carelessness would be overwhelming. People would be alive again, and because they had never stopped from their own point of view, they would not understand why their aliveness now seems miraculous. You might go back to the hallway and see the neighbor press the elevator button. The doors open. He steps inside. He does not know you saw him, held in that exact posture, transformed by the pause into something solemn and unreachable. He does not know that his ordinary gesture became part of your survival map. He may nod politely, or not at all. The elevator closes, and the building swallows him back into the normal flow of separate lives. The family at dinner next door continues. The spoon lowers into the bowl. The candle flame flickers. The hidden hands beneath the table finally touch. The orange light across their faces shifts with the living movement of flame and breath. Perhaps nothing in that room has been altered. Perhaps they will never know that their smallest expressions were preserved in the stillness and seen by someone passing through an impossible interval. Their privacy returns because time returns, and with it, the merciful opacity of normal life. Not every scene would be gentle. In the street, the bicycle might complete its fall. The suspended spray behind the taxi might strike the road. The ambulance might surge forward through the intersection. A dropped glass somewhere in the city might finally shatter. The return of time would release all the consequences that were waiting. But if the pause was clean, the world would not explode into chaos. It would simply continue the many events that were already underway, some harmless, some dangerous, most ordinary. This distinction is important. The stopped interval itself would not necessarily damage those who were fully frozen. If no internal process occurs, there is no aging, no oxygen.
Deprivation, no fear, no memory, no suffering during the pause. The risk comes from boundaries, exceptions, and restarts. It comes from what remains moving while other things do not, from what is displaced, from what happens if physical states resume without coordination. In other words, the danger is not stillness alone. The danger is the contact between stillness and motion. That contact is where every deep question gathers. If a moving person touches a frozen world, what transfers? Force? Heat? Momentum? Chemical change? If an object is moved during the pause, does it keep its previous momentum or gain a new one? If a living body is moved, does consciousness remain absent until full time returns? The honest answer is that known physics does not give us a working model for such a boundary. The boundary is the fiction that makes the scenario visible, but by examining it, we learn how inseparable the real world is. There is also a question of scale. A pause that affected one room would be strange, but perhaps survivable for the rest of the planet. A pause that affected one city would create a boundary where moving weather, traffic, and communication met a region that had stopped. A pause that affected the whole Earth would raise questions about the moon, the sun, and the wider universe. If Earth alone stopped while the rest of space continued, sunlight would still arrive from outside unless the boundary prevented it. If the whole universe stopped, there would be no outside clock by which to measure the pause.
The more total the event becomes, the more completely it hides itself. This is why the cleanest version is also the most invisible. If every process everywhere stopped and later resumed, then no internal observer could know. There would be no missing time because nothing would be available to miss it. 1 billion years could pass in some impossible external sense, and for the universe itself, it would be indistinguishable from no time at all. Because change is what gives duration meaning. Time without events is not something consciousness can hold. The exception changes that. A pocket of continuing time creates comparison. It lets one process measure another by difference. Your hunger measures the pause because the frozen world does not grow hungry with you. Your notes measure it because ink dried while other surfaces did not change. Your memory measures it because the faces outside remained fixed while your thoughts moved through fear, planning, fatigue, and awe. Measurement, at its deepest, is relationship. Without one thing changing beside another, duration becomes a word without handles. Biology depends especially on this relationship. Inside the brain, experience is not stored as a perfect recording, but as activity that leaves traces, strengthened pathways, altered states, patterns that can later be reconstructed. A person who did not pass through the pause has no place to put it in memory. Their body did not receive it. Their senses did not update. The event belongs to no narrative they lived. That is why your story would feel so lonely even after people returned. You could stand among them again, but part of your life would remain outside the common timeline. There might be physical signs on you that others could not ignore. Fatigue, dehydration, scratches from moving through tight spaces, a jacket wet from rain that was not falling for anyone else until moments later. If hours passed, perhaps hunger, exhaustion, or the number of pages written would show that some duration had occurred. Yet even those signs could be doubted. People often explain the strange by reducing it to the familiar. They would ask whether you had slept, whether you had wandered, whether you had imagined more than happened. The stopped world would return you not only to motion, but to the burden of being believed. This is another human consequence that belongs to many extreme experiences, even real ones. The person who lived through something rare often finds that language is smaller than the event. Words become bridges, but not always strong enough to carry the whole weight. You might say the air became a wall, and someone would picture a storm. You might say the city was silent, and someone would picture a quiet night. You might say people were unreachable, and someone would think of loneliness, not temporal separation. The most accurate parts may sound the least believable. Still, the attempt to speak would matter. Human beings
repair reality together by telling what happened, comparing memories, building shared accounts. Even if others questioned the details, the act of narration would bring the private interval back into human time. It would turn pure isolation into testimony. The frozen second would no longer belong only to the room, the rain, and the unsent message. It would become a story, moving from one mind to another, changing as all stories change, but alive. In a scientific community, the same process would be slower and more disciplined. A report would become a hypothesis. A hypothesis would demand predictions. If time stopped once, could residual effects remain? Could atomic clocks show discontinuity? Could biological samples activated during the pause differ from those untouched? Could displaced objects be traced? The questions might never be answered,
but the asking would restore proportion. The impossible would be approached not by panic, but by method. Method is one of the ways humans live with the unknown. We cannot command the universe to be simple. We can only observe, compare, revise, and remain humble before what does not yet fit. A stopped time event, if it left evidence, would force that humility on every field at once: physics, biology, psychology, engineering, ethics. It would remind us that the ordinary world is not ordinary because it is shallow. It is ordinary because its depths are stable enough for us to build lives on top of them. And if no evidence ever appeared, the event would remain inward. It would become part of the witness more than part of history. That too is plausible within the thought experiment. Not every meaningful experience becomes public fact. Some transform only the person who lived them. The world moves on, but the witness sees it differently, and that difference quietly changes decisions, attention, fear, gratitude, and the way a hand rests on a window while rain runs down the glass. Perhaps the deepest evidence would not be a measurement at all, but a changed instinct inside a living mind. Before the pause, time may have felt like pressure, something always running out. Afterward, it might feel more like permission. Permission for a sound to travel, permission for a wound to close, permission for a sentence to reach another person before the moment passes. The world would still be uncertain, and life would still be brief, but brevity would no longer look only like loss. It would look like the condition that lets anything arrive, touch, answer, and become remembered. In the days after, assuming days continue, you might search for reports. News channels would speak of strange claims if others had noticed anomalies. Scientists might discuss unexplained synchronization errors, though such a dramatic global event would require extraordinary evidence. Social media might fill with jokes, theories, fear, exaggerations, and false memories. Human beings are pattern seekers. Give us one crack in the ordinary, and we will pour meaning into it. Some would call it supernatural. Some would call it a weapon. Some would call it a glitch. Some would dismiss it entirely. Governments, if presented with credible evidence, would likely treat the matter first as a risk. Could it happen again? Was it local or global? Did it affect infrastructure? Did any aircraft, medical systems, reactors, satellites, or defense networks show anomalies? The questions would be practical before philosophical. Civilization survives by asking how to reduce harm, but the deeper fear would remain underneath. If time itself can fail, then the background trust behind every plan has been disturbed. That fear is hard to name because time is usually not one object among others. We fear storms because we can imagine wind. We fear earthquakes because we can imagine ground moving. We fear disease because we can imagine the body changing against us. But the failure of time is more fundamental. It threatens the stage on which every other fear appears. Without time, no shelter can be built, no rescue can arrive, no wound can heal, no promise can be kept, and no fear can even finish becoming fear. The mind would return to the frozen second long after the city moved on. You might be in a cafe weeks later and suddenly notice a spoon falling through air, and for a fraction of a moment expect it to stop. You might hear rain and remember the beads hanging in the street. You might stand at a crossing and see pedestrians mid-stride, alive with motion,
and feel both gratitude and dread. Trauma often hides in ordinary details because ordinary details are where the impossible first entered. Yet the memory could also deepen attention. A moving world is easy to overlook precisely because it never stops offering itself. After the pause, every small continuation might feel newly visible. Steam rising from a cup, curtains shifting with a draft. The tiny delay before someone answers a question, the changing pressure of a hand holding yours. A clock's second hand, once annoying or meaningless, becomes a quiet sign that reality is still unfolding. This is where the thought experiment turns gently away from fear. We often imagine stopping time as a wish, more time to rest, to decide, to prevent mistakes, to remain young, to hold a perfect moment before it disappears. The wish is understandable. Human life is brief, and time carries everything away with a patience that can feel cruel. But a world without passing moments is not a world where life is preserved in any meaningful sense. It is a world where life cannot proceed. A flower that never changes does not bloom. A wound that never changes does not heal. A child who never changes does not grow. Music without time is not music, only an arrangement waiting to be heard. Love without time cannot become trust, apology, memory, or return. Even peace requires duration. Rest is not the absence of all process. It is the body moving slowly toward repair. Sleep is not nothingness. It is a deeply active state, full of rhythms the conscious mind does not need to supervise. The strange mercy of time is that it allows both loss and restoration. The same flow that carries a day away also permits morning to arrive. The same sequence that makes bodies age allows cells to mend, seasons to turn, grief to soften, and understanding to form. We cannot keep the world by freezing it. We receive the world by moving with it, imperfectly, briefly, and together. For science, time remains one of the deepest subjects, not because clocks are mysterious, but because time touches every description of reality. In everyday life, it seems simple. The past is gone, the future has not happened, and the present is where we stand. In physics, the picture becomes richer and stranger. Relativity links time with space. Thermodynamics gives direction to many processes through entropy. Quantum theory raises difficult questions about measurement, change, and probability. None of this makes the fantasy of a stopped city physically easy, but it shows why the idea feels so profound. We experience time not as an equation, but as a world becoming itself. A planet rotates, and morning enters a room. The moon moves, and tides rise along shorelines. The heart contracts, and blood reaches the brain. Neurons fire, and a thought becomes a choice. Somewhere, a star that sent out light before human civilization began allows that light to arrive tonight in someone's eye. To live is to be placed inside overlapping rhythms, from the microscopic to the cosmic. When time stopped in the thought experiment, those rhythms were revealed by their absence. The missing hum of electricity, the rain without falling, the people without gestures, the air without sound, the phone without connection. Each absence pointed back to a real dependency.
The world is not a collection of still objects. It is a choreography so constant that we mistake it for a background. Perhaps that is why the return of time would not answer all the questions. It would simply return the conditions under which questions can be asked. The scientist can measure again. The witness can speak again. The city can argue, doubt, investigate, forget, and remember. The stopped interval may remain uncertain, but uncertainty itself belongs to a moving mind. A universe where nothing changes contains no mysteries, because mystery requires someone to approach an answer. As evening comes after the return, the city seems almost unchanged. Rainwater runs along gutters. Cars pass with soft, shining tires. Apartment windows brighten one by one. Somewhere, dinner plates are washed. Somewhere, an elevator rises. Somewhere, a person writes a message and receives a reply. These ordinary sequences do not announce themselves as miracles, but they are miraculous in the quiet sense that they depend on so much working together without being noticed. You may return to the same window where the first droplet trembled. The glass now carries streaks of
water rather than beads suspended in place. The street below is full of imperfect life. People hurry, cars hesitate. A cyclist steadies himself after a rough turn. Someone bends to pick up a fallen orange. The world has resumed its refusal to be perfectly arranged. It is messy, fluid, vulnerable, and alive. The memory of the frozen city remains superimposed over the moving one. For a moment, you can see both the paused driver and the moving taxi, the suspended rain and the falling rain, the silent hallway and the neighbor stepping into the elevator, the family held around the table and the flame now flickering between them. The two worlds occupy the same place, separated only by the fact that one had a future and the other did not, until time returned. If you tried to tell the story, perhaps you would simplify it. You would say the world stopped. But what really happened, in the logic of the thought experiment, is more precise and more haunting. The world outside you lost the ability to become. It remained full of matter, shape, light, and stored possibility, but possibility could not unfold. You alone, or almost alone, stayed inside, becoming. That is why the experience felt like exile. You were not in another place. You were in another relation to change. This relation to change is what gives human life its tenderness. We are never finished objects. We are processes that depend on other processes. A person is not only a body located in space. A person is a heartbeat continuing, a memory forming, a voice answering, a face changing when someone familiar enters the room. To freeze a person completely is not to preserve the person as they are experienced. It is to preserve the outline of them while the living sequence waits. Maybe this is why photographs move us. A photograph captures one fraction of time and lets us return to it, but we understand that the captured moment once belonged to a larger flow. The smile had a before and after. The child grew older. The light changed. The person walked away. A photograph is meaningful because time continued beyond it. A truly stopped world would be photograph without memory, image without witness, beauty without continuation. The question of what would happen if time stopped, therefore, has two answers. The strict answer is almost nothing,
Because without time, no happening can occur, no experience, no movement, no damage, no awareness, no story. The more imaginative answer requires an exception, a moving pocket, and from that exception comes everything we have explored: silence, suffocation, unreachable people, fragile survival, moral uncertainty, and the strange violence of returning motion. Both answers matter. One protects the logic, the other reveals the feeling, and the feeling points back to the real world. Time has not stopped. The second hand moves. Breath enters and leaves the body. Light travels from the lamp to the wall. Somewhere outside, air presses against windows and trees adjust their leaves. Messages cross invisible networks. Blood moves quietly in millions of sleeping people. The planet turns, carrying cities through darkness toward morning, with no need for anyone to push it. The Earth itself is a long story of time made visible. Mountains rise and erode. Continents drift over millions of years. Oceans open and close. Species appear, adapt, vanish, and leave traces in stone. Human life, by comparison, is brief, but it participates in the same vast principle. Change is not an interruption of nature. Change is nature's language. To wish for time to stop is, in a way, to wish for the sentence to stop before it can mean anything. Yet, there are moments when the wish remains understandable. A quiet room before dawn, a face you do not want to lose, a season of life that feels almost complete, a night when the world is soft and you want nothing to move too quickly. The desire to pause time is often a desire to be less afraid of losing what we love. But the thought experiment gently teaches that holding a moment forever would also remove the life inside it. The value of a moment comes partly from its passing, from the fact that it can be remembered, answered, and followed. In that sense, the stopped world is not only a nightmare, it is a contrast that makes motion visible. It lets us notice that a falling drop of rain is not ordinary at all. It is gravity, air, light, water, and time composing a brief event no one can keep. It lets us notice that a voice crossing a
Room is a physical miracle disguised as conversation. It lets us notice that when someone answers us, they are sharing not just words, but a moving present. As the night deepens, the fear of the frozen city begins to loosen, not because it was harmless, but because it has given back a clearer world. The ticking clock no longer feels like an enemy. It is a small instrument marking continuity. The rain no longer feels like background noise. It is proof that the atmosphere is alive with motion. The distant traffic is not only restlessness, it is a sign that thousands of paths are unfolding at once, each one guided by attention, habit, accident, and hope. There is comfort in remembering that time does not need to be understood completely to be lived within. Most of what sustains us is like that. We do not understand every process inside a cell, yet the body heals while we sleep. We do not track the path of every photon, yet the room appears. We do not calculate the atmosphere, yet we breathe. We live inside trust, long before we explain it. A calm room at night is full of these trusts. The bed supports the body. The air remains breathable. The walls hold their shape. The heart continues its patient work. The world outside moves without demanding attention. Time passes, and because it passes, the mind can soften. Thoughts can arrive and leave.
A worry can rise, become clear for a moment, and fade. Sleep itself is a surrender to continuity, a confidence that the next moment can be allowed to come without being watched. Imagine now the city from far above, long after the impossible pause has ended. The streets shine with rain. Rivers reflect bridges. Trains move like thin lines of light through neighborhoods. Planes cross the sky, each one held not by magic, but by motion through air. In apartments, people turn off lamps. In hospitals, monitors blink. In kitchens, glasses are placed beside sinks. In bedrooms, clocks move quietly through the dark. No one sees time directly. They see its traces, a shadow shifting, a candle shortening, a child growing taller, a coastline changing shape, a memory becoming gentler around its edges. Even the stars are not fixed in the way they appear. They move, burn, age, and send their light across distances so large that looking upward is always also looking backward. The universe is not still. It is slow in some places, fast in others, but everywhere it is becoming. The frozen second, then, remains as an imagined doorway, a way to step outside the obvious and return with renewed attention. It asks what a human is without response, what a city is without motion, what a life is without sequence. It answers not with a single fact, but with a feeling that continuity is fragile and ordinary change is more precious than it seems. If you listen closely, the room you are in now may begin to reveal its own quiet processes. The faint sound of air, the weight of the body settling, the small shift of fabric, the distant life of a building. None of it needs to be dramatic. None of it needs to be understood all at once. It is enough that it continues. The clocks outside continue for now, not as enemies, not as thieves, more like rivers, carrying each moment away so that another can arrive. The world does not hold still, and because it does not hold still, morning is possible. Voices are possible. Repair is possible. The next breath is possible. Somewhere, rain is falling through a streetlight, not frozen, not waiting, not preserved in perfect glass, but falling. Each drop appears, shines, and disappears into the dark road. Then another comes, then another. The pattern is never the same, yet it is steady enough to rest inside. And beneath that soft, moving rain, the city continues, second by second, carrying everyone forward into the quiet mercy of time.